Active Directory, Groups Part 2, Organizational Units, and Delegation of Control. In this nugget, we're going to be getting a little bit more detail about how to control memberships in a specific security group, particularly local groups such as the administrator's security group. You can control that membership using a group policy object, which is a very powerful way to manage those groups. We also will take a look here at organizational units. Now, we've already created those in the past and worked with them some, but we'll get into some more details about how they're used. And then we'll take a look at the delegation of control wizard, which is really a way of setting permissions on organizational units, giving users some level of administrative control. Alright, as we get started here, let's take a look at group memberships again. Now, we've gone through quite a lot of detail in our last nugget, but there's one thing that we didn't really cover, and that is how to force somebody to be a member of a specific group on every computer, especially if it's a local group. You see, I can add a user to maybe a domain local group, and they could be a member of that domain local group no matter where they are in the domain. It doesn't matter which computer they log on to in the domain. However, there's other situations in which I want somebody to be a member of a local security group, like the local administrators group, but I don't really have the time or the ability to manually add them to every local administrator's security group. So how can I go about doing that? Let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's say that here in Tucson, let's say that we've got a couple dozen desktops. You see I've only got the one in there, but let's just pretend I've got a couple dozen there. And, there's not really any administrators there. You see, we don't have anybody to administer those machines. But I do have a few users in that office, and you can see here I've got Tucson user 01. It turns out that I want this specific user to be able to be the local administrator on any computer in the Tucson desktops organizational unit. Now, a couple of ways I could do that. Number one, I could add them to the domain admins security group in the domain, but that's way over permissioning that user, and they could then control servers. They could then delete user account. They could do a whole bunch of stuff. They could do a lot of damage. But I just want them, they're kind of a smart user in the Tucson users or OU, and they're probably more tech savvy than any of the rest of them. So if we need some help troubleshooting somebody's computer down there, I want them to be a member of the local administrators security group on these couple dozen computers that might appear here. So, how do we force that to happen? Well, we can use something called group policy to make that happen. Let me show you how it works. Here I'll just go down to group policy management, and I want to create a group policy object on those desktops. But before we edit, though, let's go here to the Windows 8 client computer that we're talking about. If I go to Computer Management, where you can see I'm in the Groups item, notice that the Administrator's Security Group has a couple of default memberships. First of all Windows computers will have the local administrator as a member of the Administrator's Security Group. They will also have, if they're a domain member, the domain admins in that domain as a member of the administrator's security group, meaning that anybody who's a domain admin has full control over all computers that are members of that domain. And then you can also add other accounts as you like. You can see here that I've added trainer. Now, it's not practical for me to add in here the Tucson user 01, Tucson user 01, and to go through all of this on every single computer throughout my entire domain. Or in this office at least. So I'm going to click on cancel. It's much simpler if I just go do this by using a group policy object. So here we are with the group policies over here. And what I'm going to do is go to Tucson desktops, and I'm going to create a policy right there by right-clicking on it and to choose to create a GPO in the domain and link it there. Now, why am I doing it this way? Well, we've got a lot more about GPOs to talk about in the future in another nugget, but for right now, I just want you to understand that I have to focus it on the specific OU that I want to control the contents of. I could link it to the domain, but that would make my Tucson user 01 account a full admin for every computer throughout my entire hierarchy. Wow. Way over permissioning. Almost the same really there as making them a domain admin. So that's more permission than I really want to do. So I'm going to do it right here, and I'm going to call this restricted groups, which is basically what this is called. This policy is called. So once I've got that, I'm going to right click here to choose edit, and then I'm going to browse down into this under policies, under computer configuration policies, Windows settings, security settings, and then you can see here we've got restricted groups. Now what I'll do is to right click there to choose add group. One thing you do not want to do is the intuitive thing. What would most people do? Well, this is what I would have done the first time I saw it. Click Browse, and then you can just type administrators, right? And then there they are. Don't do that. Why? Because if we click on Browse, notice that it's getting the administrators from the domain, the administrator's account from the domain. We don't want to do that because we're only trying to control membership in this specific computer administrator's security group. Okay, so I'm going to click Add Group. Here, it's kind of weird, but you just type administrators and then click OK. All right. Now there they are. Now I can add my membership, and one thing I want to do is this time I can click Browse because I'm trying to use a Active Directory account for this. Tucson user 01. Okay, so there's one of the members. Now here's an important thing to do. Don't stop there. This is an explicit tool, meaning that if I click OK past everything right now and commit the changes, then what it's really going to do is strip the membership of that local administrator's security group out. So domain admins, no longer administrators. The administrator account, no longer administrator. The trainer account, no longer. So it would then make only the Tucson user 01 account a local administrator. Well, that would pretty well hobble that specific computer, and it would take it out of my scope of administration as a domain admin. So that would cause more problems. So what I want to do is to make sure that they're still in there. So I'm going to again click Browse. And we just can enter in domain admins. Okay. So we got that account right there. And then I'm also going to add in the trainer account. Now I'm not going to browse the domain there. I'm just going to type in trainer because remember that was a local account. And anything that's a local account that you want to use, you just type in the name. Okay. All right, so we'll click OK here. And then the next thing I'm going to do is to go to this computer. And right now we're not going to see a change yet. Group policy actually has to be refreshed. So one of the most confident ways to do that really is to restart the computer. So I'm just going to go down here to kind of do this the hard way. Oh, come on. I tell you, I really don't like this new start menu because it's you got to get right on the pixel with this thing. Since I'm connected using remote desktop, it won't let me shut it down unless I do something like this. So I'm going to restart the computer with a time of 0. And once this has restarted, we'll come back and take a look at it. Alright then, so having gotten back here to our Windows 8 computer after restarting, I want to point out something here as I go to local users and groups. First of all, we're going to see the membership in the local administrators group, but one thing I didn't mention is that the local administrator account, in other words, this account right here, you can never really remove that one from the administrator's security group. Even if I have not explicitly added them into the restricted groups, they're always going to be a member. So it's kind of hard-coded in there. And there you can see it right there. There's the administrator. Okay. But otherwise, if I had not also added in domain admins and trainer, they would have been stripped out, and I would have prevented any domain admin from administering this machine. But there's the Tucson user 01 account that we wanted to have in here for sure, and therefore we can see this has been accomplished successfully. Alright, now having returned to the Windows 8 computer here, offline I went ahead and removed the group policy object, so it's gone, and the administrator's security group is now back to the defaults. Notice that the Tucson user 01 account is no longer there. That having been done, let me show you a couple of other ways to adjust the group membership there instead of just using the method that I showed you a moment ago. And then let me go over here to my domain controller where again I've opened up group policy management. I deleted the policy I told you about earlier, but notice that over here on Tucson users now, I've gone to create a policy here called Tucson user 01 admin. Again, that's an arbitrary name. You can call it whatever you want to. And then as I open that up to edit it, notice the path that I took. You can go to either computer configuration or user configuration, but it all depends upon what the contents are of the OU to which this policy is linked. It's linked to a user's container, so I'm going under user configuration. We'll talk more about that again when we talk about GPOs later. But what I would do here is, again, I might want to control the membership of the administrators group or any other group that I decide. Here I want to still work with the administrators group. That's usually a common one that we want to control the membership of. So I want to create a new local group. Now, it's a little misleading because we're not actually creating a new local group on the destination computers where this will apply. But we're creating a new local group rule, I guess you could say. And you can see again here that we have several different options. We can create a group. Maybe there's not a group there, and we want to create a group called Tucson Admins or something like that, or accountants or something. So we could create a brand new one. We could take the existing group if there is already one there, and we could replace it. We could just update the existing group. So, for example, with the admins, there's already administrators security group on the local machines. There always is. So here we don't want to delete it. We just want to update its membership with whatever we specify in this interface. And then, of course, you can also delete. You can't delete some of the default accounts, but if you had an account that you built yourself at some point in the past, you don't need it anymore, you could choose that option. Then what we would do here is we would just simply select a group name or type in a group name. Once again, if I click on the browse thing, similar to what we showed you earlier, this is going to look up the administrators in NuggetLab.com. That's not what I want. I don't want to adjust the membership there. What I really want to do is adjust the membership of the local administrators group. Also, you might have seen this down arrow here. I could click down here. Again, these are all built-ins. We don't want that. Okay, what we're looking for is the hard-coded administrators local security group. Administrators. Okay, like that. And then we can also rename this, by the way. That's kind of handy. And it's a little bit of a security by obscurity thing where you can rename one of the commonly known accounts to something else. It's still easy to figure out which one it is if you're an experienced hacker or security expert. But otherwise, I'm just going to leave this the way it is. And then here it says, add the current user. This is a little bit misleading as well. You have to be careful for this. Well, who's the current user? Well, I'm logged on as the trainer account, I think. Let me double check that. If I go down here. Yeah, I'm logged on as trainer. Okay, that doesn't mean it's going to add the trainer account to the administrator's security group. What that means is it's going to add the current user, meaning the current one that I specified down here. And you can see some other options here which kind of explain themselves. But I'm going to click on Add, and now I can browse for it because I'm looking for specific accounts here. In this case, I think I'm still going to use Tucson user 01. And notice that it has now added that one. Again, I can choose my action to add to the group or remove from the group if I like. Okay, but I'm going to choose Add. And then we click on Apply or OK, and we're good to go. Okay, so that's pretty much how we set that up. Now, if I go back over here to my Windows 8 client machine, let's just go ahead and take a look at what we've got. Okay, and I was actually signed in as the wrong user, so I signed in as Tucson user 01, which is the account I'm interested in. Again, since the group policy applies to the an organizational unit that contains this user account, it should apply to this user. So now if I go to look at computer management, for example, let's go down here and right-click, computer management, we should see that Tucson user 01 is a member of the local administrators group, and sure enough, there they are. Okay, so again, just a really powerful way to adjust or add or otherwise modify group memberships on destination computers without actually having to visit them in order to do that. We only visited this machine just to confirm that it did work. Alright, as we move to organizational units, you've already seen me create OUs a number of different ways, and I've got quite a few of them already in existence here. But we need to get a little bit more detail about organizational units and understanding what they are. And first of all, remember, they're really Active Directory objects, but they don't really do anything on their own. I can't just take an OU and perform some administrative miracle on it. What I have to have, though, is it has to contain users, groups, or computers in order to have really any function. Once it's got those users inside of the Active Directory organizational unit, then I can start to do something with it. The main idea here for OUs is mostly that it's for simplifying administration. This is for a few different reasons. Number one, just as mere humans, it's difficult for us to comb through a whole container, like the user's container, of, let's say, 10,000 users and to look for a specific user. Now, I know there's search tools you can use, and you can search against Active Directory and all that. But still, sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you just want to scroll down until you find the user that you want. So that's one reason why an organizational unit might make things simpler. Another thing to think about with OUs is you got to make sure that you don't go down the wrong road about how you think of them. They are not, in particular, they are not for permissions. So you would not take a folder, right-click on it and choose sharing, and then share it to an organizational unit. For the most part, however, organizational units can be divided up into a number of different things. It can be divided up into, I'm going to put some more bullets out here, job role or department. Okay, and that's very similar to how we would create our global groups. So job role or department, like the human resources department, might have a human resources OU. And also inside of that human resources OU, we might put the Human Resources Global Security Group, and all of our users in that OU are members of that security group. Okay, so very often they kind of mirror what we have in terms of our global security groups as well. But they're not for permissions. So again, you would not right-click on a folder and share it to an OU, but you could share it to the Human Resources Global Security Group. Or more likely, as we looked at in our last nugget, take that global security group, nest it inside of a domain local, and then share it. But anyway, my main point here is it's not for permissions. It's also very powerful with group policy objects. It's so powerful that you can single-handedly, with just a couple of clicks here and there, have far-reaching administration on maybe thousands of users or computers all at once. Likewise, misconfiguring a group policy object on an organizational unit could have devastating effects that could be very difficult to undo. So we'll have to be very well aware of what GPOs are capable of when we get to that particular nugget. Now, another thing I want to point out here is that you have a couple of default containers there. There's user and computer containers. Remember, they're not organizational units. They are containers, and they're not OUs. And the significance of that goes back up here to the group policy objects again. I cannot assign a group policy object to a user or computer. In fact, let's just go ahead and take a look here as we go back over here. This users item here, that's there by default. I don't create that when I install the domain controller. Everything you see there is already put in there in Active Directory. The only thing I added was the trainer account. And then they also have this built-in account, built-in container, excuse me. This one is also not an organizational unit. And I didn't put that in the whiteboard, but that's also true. And these, again, are also all default that Windows put there. I didn't touch or create any of this stuff. And then the other thing we would have there would be computers, which I don't know if I have anything. I guess I do have a couple of computers in there. But these computer accounts, when you join a computer to the domain, by default will go into the computer's container. If you use some kind of scripting or a batch file or some other command line method to create a user account, by default they will go into the user's container. Problem there is you cannot assign a group policy object to that container because it's not an organizational unit. So, for example, if I were to go to, I think I have it still open here, go to this, to my group policy management console, notice that if I try to browse for the users or computers container, they're not here anywhere. They just don't exist, so I can't right-click on one of them like I can on an organizational unit and create a GPO in that location. Okay, so that's a big part of what we've got going on here, is that they're not OUs, and as a result, you cannot apply any of the administration there. Likewise, you cannot work with delegation on users and computers, which I'll show you here in this same nugget shortly. All right. Oh, you know what else I realized? I misspelled that. It's users and the computers containers. Okay, that's what they're called. Now, one of the things that we have here as a tool is something called a redirect user and redirect computer. These are very simple to use tools that run from a command line, and we've had those for a couple of previous versions of Windows as well. The advantage of that is, remember I said earlier, if you do something like create a batch file or some other kind of an automated method to create your user accounts, if you don't specify a path for users or computers, it'll automatically dump the users into the users container, the computers into the computers container, and once again, you're out of scope in terms of things like GPOs or delegation. So using redir user and redir computer, you have the capability to have a lot more control over those items. So for example, what I will often do in organizations is I'll go to the domain here and I'll create a new organizational unit, and I'll just call this locked down or something like that. Locked down, and then users, let's call it that. And you can protect the container from accidental deletion, which I'll talk to you about again here shortly in this same nugget. But the thing here is I might want to have my new user accounts that I create automatically shoveled into this location, and then I might go to my group policy object, and as I refresh the screen here, I might set up some kind of the mother of all policies on the locked down users organizational unit, which takes away just about every privilege and everything. That way, I don't accidentally overprivilege a user, and then once it's time for that user to start work on their first day. Maybe they're a new hire. Then we know which department they're going to go into, which office they're going to be in, and so on. And then using Active Directory users in computers or Atom, I can drag that user into the appropriate OU where they have group policy objects, which will appropriately control them. Now then, to go ahead and use that particular tool, I'm going to go to a command prompt, and I'll run this as an administrator. And you just type it in, basically. It's very, very simple. Reader USR, and then you would specify the full path, the distinguished name for where you want the new user accounts to be shoveled into. Again, this is only if you don't specify a path, such as in a batch file or a command line, you just forgot it or whatever. To avoid it going into the users container, it'll go into whatever path I specify here. So it might look something like this. Reader user, and then OU equals lockdown users, comma, and then domain component nugalab, domain component com, and press enter. And then I might do a similar thing for computers, and that would really be the same way. So to create this new user account, I'm going to go to net user to create the account, which does not normally specify a path for the user in terms of where their OU is. So instead, what it would normally do is just dump them into the users container. Now, since I've run that command for redirect user, it should put them into the lockdown users. The name of my user is Sasha Sims. I don't know where I came up with that name. I guess I just like S's today. Anyway, asterisk, and then a /add. Okay, so I'm going to press enter here. It's going to ask me for the password and to confirm it. I hope I typed that in right. I just changed my default password for this kind of thing, and I've been having the hardest time typing it in. Anyway, so it did complete successfully, and if I refresh the screen, sure enough, there's Sasha Sims. And the similar thing would happen if I had created a new computer account from the command line as well. Okay, now let's talk here about creating and deleting organizational units, which you've already seen me do a number of times, but one of the important things there is when it comes to how we create these accounts and how we create their contents. So if we took a look at earlier, when I right-clicked up here on the domain to create a new organizational unit, remember, it has this item, protect container from accidental deletion. Why do we have that? Well, in earlier Active Directory, we never used to have that checkbox. And then we could have, some summer intern come in, and there might be, 1,000 users in procurement, and someone said that the summer intern was supposed to delete the production organizational unit. And they got their alphabet mixed up or something like that. So okay, so there's production, and I right-click here, and I choose delete. Do you want to delete this? Yes. And, now we're prevented from it because of that checkbox. In previous versions of Windows, someone could just accidentally delete one of these OUs and wipe out all of the accounts inside of it. It would also unlink all of the group policy objects. So a simple deletion, which takes less than 10 seconds to do, could create hours or even days of recovery work. So now, by choosing that checkbox, which is there by default, to prevent accidental deletion, it gives you a gut check. And when you do that, you say, ooh, that was a big red X. Maybe I should pay attention to that. Oh, this isn't the right place. I was supposed to be deleting production instead of procurement. So now you get the idea. Now, here comes the case where you'll say, oh, fine, James, how do I get rid of that? And then if I really did want to delete procurement, well, if I go to properties, notice that, gee, not really, I don't even know what any of this stuff is. That doesn't look like it's going to help me at all. So what in the world am I going to do to get rid of it? What you have to do is to go to View and Advanced Features. Once you've done that, it shows you a whole bunch of other obfuscated stuff. But what we're interested in right now is that now when we go to the properties of procurement or any other organizational unit, then we can go to the Object tab and deselect Protect Object from Accidental Deletion. Now if we right-click on it and choose Delete, and we could go back to normal view for this if we wanted to, but it doesn't really matter either way. But I'm just going to delete this organizational unit now. It does give you a warning that there's people in here. Don't sink the ship. There's still people on board, and there's groups. There could be containers, other organizational units inside of it. That's what the delete subtree server control would be. Is if I had, for example, a sub OU inside of procurement, then even if they were checked for delete protection, then they would also be deleted. Okay, but I don't have anything else in there for other organizational units, just those accounts. So I'm going to click on Yes. And now notice that we've completely gotten rid of that procurement organizational unit. All right, let's talk here about delegation. This really follows nicely on our previous discussion of organizational units because you use the delegation of control wizard on organizational units. You can't use it on containers, for example, just on OUs. What we really do with this is we configure the organizational unit permissions, and we want to allow specific users, or more likely groups, to have a certain level of administration. So maybe somebody's not a domain admin, and we don't want them to be. That's too much power. However, in their own regional office, let's say again down in Tucson, we want that person to be able to reset passwords for any users down there. Or maybe, that can be very useful if the full-time IT staff is way in a different time zone, and we don't want to call them when someone's password has been forgotten. I mean, if someone calls me from way out on the East Coast and it's 8 o'clock their time, it's probably going to be 5 o'clock my time. Well, that's really too early. I don't want to wake me up at 5 o'clock in the morning to reset a password. I don't even roll out of bed until like 11:30. Just kidding, folks. It's more like 11:15. But anyway, so this is very useful so that we can narrow the scope of management for the administration to somebody else who might be there on site, who can help the user, but who does not necessarily have to have a high level of administration. So it's useful to narrow that management. We can give them the privileges that they need without over-permissioning them. So how could you use this? Well, a lot of times you might use this with interns or beginning administrators, or someone who's been promoted from maybe within your company. Maybe they have IT experience, just not with Active Directory. Maybe they were previously programming. Maybe they were, programming COBOL. Welcome back to 1988. Anyway, they don't have a lot of Active Directory experience, or they're fresh out of college or summer interns, and so you don't want to make them domain admins or enterprise admins, or even account admins, account operators. So instead, you can just give them a specific OU that you've given them some management permission over, and they can do a lot of the same roles that a full-time administrator would do, like a domain admin. It's just their daily use of it is going to be a lot narrower in scope than what a domain admin might do. It might also be useful for those smaller offices, like I said. So they don't have a full-time IT person on staff there, but they do have somebody who's reasonably technical, who knows how to right-click and reset a password, or do something simple like that. So it's a great way to limit the administrative scope for what a person can do. This actually, by the way, all this really is, it's a matter of setting the permissions themselves on the access control list on an organizational unit, because just like files and folders have permissions, organizational units also actually have permissions on them as well. Now, we could actually go into an OU and set permissions if we knew the dark arts of Active Directory to be able to do this. There are ways of making this happen. But you can set permissions on each individual user account, allowing some other user account to reset those users' passwords, for example. But it's much simpler just to reset the permissions on the OU, and then inheritance will flow down to the users and allow you to reset the passwords on those users inside of the OU. Alright, so to demonstrate this, I've just logged on to a Windows 8 computer here, where I've logged on as Tucson User 01. Offline, I downloaded the Remote Server Administrative Tools for Windows 8. You can look that up or Google that, and it should give you a result where you can download that tool. What this does, though, is it gives us administrative tools that would normally only be available on a server or a domain controller. So now that when I click on Administrative Tools, we'll see all of these things that we would not normally see in Windows 8, but we do now that I've installed the RSAT. So if I go to Active Directory Users and Computers, for example, we'll see that I can go to the Tucson Users organizational unit where my account is. There it is right there. But notice that for these other users, none of these are activated. Why? Because when I installed them or created them, I didn't give them a password, so they're disabled by default. Well, what if I am kind of the ad hoc administrator down there and I want to activate this account? Well, I can right-click on it to, first of all, give it a password. But watch what happens when I try to do this. Okay. If I try to click OK here, oh, access is denied. Why? Because I'm not an administrator anywhere in this domain. The only thing I'm an administrator of is this local computer. But trying to reset that password, that's something you do in Active Directory, and it's really done on a domain controller. So I don't have any authority there. Well, now what? That's where the delegation of control wizard comes in handy and where we have to start working with that. Now, here I've gone back to my domain controller itself where I'm logged on as the trainer account, which has full administrative access as a domain admin and an enterprise admin. And now I want to right-click on the Tucson Users Organizational Unit and choose Delegate Control so that Tucson User 01 has a higher level of access there. Then what I want to do is to select the users or groups. Now, normally, again, you'll do this by groups. So this would be, for example, I would select the help desk group out of nuggetlab.com. It's a very common thing that you will select. In this case, however, I'm just going to go to a specific user because I'm on a small scale here. So it's going to be Tucson User 01. Oops, I made it 01, didn't I? 01. And there they are. All right, and then we click on Next. And then I can choose some very common tasks that would be very useful here. Create, delete, manage user accounts. Maybe that person is responsible for bringing in the new employees, getting them trained, creating their accounts, allowing them to log on. More likely here, I want to reset user passwords and force password change at next logon. If you notice when I first tried to reset that user account, the idea there, or the checkbox there, to change at the next logon, that was grayed out. It wouldn't even allow me to check that box. Well, now by doing this, I'll be able to do that as Tucson User 01. You can see all other kinds of things here, which I think pretty well explain themselves. I recommend that you go through these different items. I'm going to go with this one for the time being, and then I'm going to click Next and Finish. And that should allow me to do what I want. So now I'm going to log off as the user on that particular computer, the Windows 8 machine, and log back on and try to see if I can make some administrative changes. Alright, so now I'm logging back on as Tucson User 01, and in reality, I probably don't have to log off and log back on because my token will be the same since my group memberships haven't changed. I just noticed that a lot of Windows things, it just seems to work better if you do, so I just do it kind of almost out of habit. But now I'm going back to Active Directory users and computers, and I want to reset this user now, their password, so I'm right-clicking on them to choose Reset Password. Notice already that this checkbox is now enabled, so I can select it or deselect it. And let me enter in the password, and then we'll be okay. Now then, returning here to my Windows Server 2012 domain controller, let's take a look at something else that we might do that's kind of handy. Let's go to, I've got too many things open at once here. Let me close up some stuff. Okay, let's go back to Active Directory users and computers and go back to the delegation of control wizard. Now, I'm not going to really change anything here, but I did want to show you one item that I didn't address earlier, and that is, I'm just going to go add a user again, Tucson User 01. And then I'm going to go ahead and next. And here's what I wanted to show you. You can even create a custom task to delegate. This means that I can be very, very granular in what I allow this particular user to do. So if I click on Next here, notice I can say this folder, existing objects in this folder, and creation of new objects in this folder, or only specific items inside of this folder. So if I go back down to user objects, for example, I can create selected objects, I can create users or delete users, or I can get even more granular, and I can say creation, deletion of specific child objects. And then I can go into this and go property specific as well, and I can say I only want them to change the logon workstations that they can use. In other words, change which machines that they can log on to. I can say, I can change the read or write ability for identifying their assistant in their user properties. If you go down here, there's all kinds of stuff. I can change their middle name. I don't know if you saw that one fly by, but I can say change their middle name. I can change their room number, whatever room they work in, for example, apparently. Their zip code. Okay, I can change the read and write of zip code. Actually, you don't need to select read because any Active Directory item in this list is already got read permissions to any user in Active Directory. Okay, you don't have to be an administrator for that. But to write it, you certainly do need to. So I could be even that granular. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and finish that. Okay, so now I've changed that permissions. Let's also take a look at another item here as well. If I go back to View in Advanced Features, remember I said earlier that this is really just a matter of changing the permissions on something, on this organizational unit. Well, if I go now to the properties of the OU, we'll see that there is a security item. And notice that Tucson User 01 has granular permissions here, special permissions. And if I click on Advanced, it'll tell me that Tucson User 01 has the ability to reset password. That's something I already had earlier that I'd set up in there, and descendant user objects with a very granular permission there. So if I double click on that, I think it'll give it to me. There we go. This is kind of handy too because this is much more readable than what we had in Windows Server 2008. But now I can go down through here and you can see here all different kinds of things that I could change. But if I go to the bottom, you can see there, that's actually what it's done, is it's just changed the access control list and the permissions for this particular user, much the same way you would do for file permissions. In fact, if I don't want this person to reset passwords anymore, I could even remove that. Okay. Now they're only allowed to do the the zip code item. Okay. So I've gotten very, very specific in what this user can do. All right, I kind of skipped ahead here and I went back to the Active Directory Administrative Center just for sake of variety here. And you can see I've browsed down here to Arizona, Tucson, and Tucson users where I've still got my accounts. Now, I've been given permission now only to change the zip code for a specific user. So I could double click on it or right click and choose properties. Both are really the same thing. And I'm going to zip on down here. And if we take a look at all their properties, the display name, you know, I can't change anything there. It's all grayed out. All this stuff's grayed out except for, hey, look, zip code. That I can make a zip code change to and click OK. So that gives us the power of delegation of control that can be as granular as I want to be using these kinds of permissions. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of Active Directory, where we continued with Groups Part 2, Organizational Units, and the Delegation of Control. We started with talking about controlling members in a specific security group by using a group policy object. There's a couple of different ways to do that, remember, using both policies and preferences. We also took a look at organizational units. Even though we've seen those in the past, we took a little bit more detail about what they're used, their purpose, how to work with them, how to delete them if necessary, and so on. And then we took a look at delegation, which is a great way to control how people can have some level of administrative access over a specific organizational unit. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.